Lovely. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you're suitably caffeinated or at least watered. And welcome back to the next part of our retrofit and practice workshop. So we heard this morning, we heard about domestic retrofit and some examples there. So we are now moving on to non-domestic, and we're going to start off with commercial offices. And I have managed to rope in our EVORA EDGE's Managing Director, Neil Dady, to do this for us. And he's going to talk through some of the projects that we work through as a company.
Thank you, Judy. Hi everybody and everybody at home. Hopefully at the start of this you've written on your piece of paper commercial retrofit and you've written my name down. If you could just write sustainability underneath that, because yesterday Judy said to me when she'd looked through my slides, you are going to mention sustainability, so if you've written sustainability down, I've done the first part of what I'm going to talk about. As Judy says, I'm Managing Director of EVORA EDGE. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do as a business and then give you some examples of retrofit within the commercial sector and how we handle and manage that. EVORA EDGE was formed in 2017, so it's relatively new as a consultancy. But we were formed out of a sustainability company, so our ethos is around sustainability and energy management. That's the driver for the way that we operate our business. We work for real estate investment funds predominantly, and real estate investment funds have transitioned their position over the last few years, and certainly within the last couple of years, to a very focused view of their properties and how their properties need to be sustainably managed. And that's where we come in, and that's where our product offering, if you like, has been developed. We call ourselves technical asset management consultants now at a portfolio level. So we deal with multiple buildings. We're quite happy to deal with one-off properties, but we like to deal with whole portfolio estates, so 20, 30 properties, where we can do benchmarking, where we can do energy monitoring, and we can see what's going on across all of those properties. So that's where we're set. We're building services engineers at the end of the day. But digital engineering and project management are the three areas that we work in. So technical asset management, digital engineering and project management. This is our circle of life for ourselves. So we would be appointed by a pension fund. So to use an example, we could talk about Aberdeen Standard as a typical client of ours. They would come to us at the point of acquisition of a property, and at that point we would do a pre-acquisition survey of the building services, and that would help to form the negotiation around the purchase price from the things that we've identified. Obviously at that stage we're also very keen to make sure we've identified any issues, because from there on in it's our problem that we're taking on board. So that pre-acquisition survey forms the basis of how we step forward from there. Once the property's been taken into the portfolio, we then move to mobilisation. We build an asset register of predominantly on building services. We don't deal with fabric, but on the building services we build a very detailed asset register, pumps, lights, everything on that. And that informs then the whole of the rest of the circle of life for us. As technical asset managers, we would go into the property probably 4 times a year and do a thorough audit on it and make sure statutory compliance is maintained on the property, make sure that the appointed maintenance contractor is delivering on their maintenance items, and making sure that the energy management of the building is being done correctly. So we've got remote access to data on the building, so metering, so we're looking at that anyway, we're trending that information, so we know when we look at a property, perhaps whether that property is outside of its benchmarking. We can benchmark against other properties within the portfolio, and we can benchmark against national standards, so we can see that picture, so we can target that building. We know that it's using more energy than it should. Our asset register then allows us to build a 5 to 10 year life cycle cost on that property. So what's it going to cost you to maintain that property over the next 5 to 10 years to stand still. Your boiler's 15 years old, it's going to need replacing. Your fan coil units are 20 years old, they're going to need replacing. That's a cost that the landlord has got to engage with. They're taking service charge from their tenants. These are typically multi-let properties that we deal with. So they're taking service charge, they're accruing that money, and they've got to spend that money. And they've got to spend that money in a way that is accountable. So from our asset register and our life cycle cost plan, we're informing the landlord where he's going to spend his money, and he can then justify that to the service charge fund and pull money down from that. So what's that position? To stand still on the property. We create that 5 to 10 year life cycle cost plan on that. And then we start to move to what we as a business start to do as our niche area, the clever bit of property management, and that's to create a digital twin of the building. It's an EPC model of the building, but we create our EPC models in dynamic simulation modelling, level 5 dynamic simulation modelling. And as a quick sort of resume, a level 3 EPC is a basic EPC. On commercial properties, we don't do any residential modelling. On commercial properties, a level 3 model is a simplified building, so a small retail shop. A level 4 would be a larger building that has got centralised systems, perhaps centralised air handling units and ductwork. Level 5 is for a complex building, and possibly a complex building has got something like an atrium, something where you can't model heat gain through the fabric of the building without creating a dynamic simulation model. Why do we create a dynamic simulation model on every building that we manage? It's because we can manipulate that model once we've created it. And once you've created that digital twin, that digital twin will go through the life of the building from there on in. So we've got let's say a 10-storey building, multi-tenanted building. We've created a dynamic simulation model of that building, but a tenant's going to arrive on the 5th floor, and they're going to put a data centre on that floor. So how does that affect that building? We can input that into our model. They're going to use it as a call centre. What does an occupancy density of 1 in 6 people compared to 1 in 10 people? What are the additional heat loads that we've got to manage in the building? So we've got this dynamic simulation model. But what it does for us then is to create a position whereby we are 100% sure that the EPC that somebody else may or may not have done correctly on the building is either correct or not correct, and we can inform the client. So you've got an EPC rating that's D. We've had a good look at it. Actually, it's an EPC rating that's an E, or it's an EPC rating that's a C. So next time you renew that EPC, you're not going to be where you think you are. There's an error in the EPC modelling, because very much like domestic modelling, there was a time when commercial EPC modellers weren't very good at what they were doing. That has improved because EPCs have now got real value in the sector that we're working in. So for a commercial landlord, for an investment fund, if they've got an EPC that's a D-rated EPC or an E-rated EPC, that building is less valuable than being B-rated EPC. So there's a marking down of the value of property for a start on their portfolio. Their net lettable area value diminishes as well, so they can't secure the rent. So it's now a very important item for them, the EPC. So we do a very accurate EPC model now at level 5 DSM. But what does that create for us? It creates the pathway, the gateway to a journey. So your EPC rating is now a D, but actually you're targeting net zero carbon by 2030, which most of the funds are doing. How do you get there? So, okay, notionally to set upon that journey, if you look at a B-rated EPC, you're a long way down that net zero carbon pathway to get to net zero carbon by 2030. So what does that look like to you as an investor? What have you got to do that? Well, we've already told you what it's going to cost you to stand still. You're going to have to maintain that building anyway. So what interventions can we make? So we're going to degas the building is the simple step. We're going to put LED lighting in, which hopefully a lot of properties have already done, but that's another step. What improvements can we make in that building to take you down the journey to a B-rated? So what's the difference between your D-rated building and your B-rated building? What does that look like? and what does that cost to do. So we've created now a PMR, Planned Maintenance Review, a 5 to 10 year Planned Maintenance Review, and we've created an alternative Planned Maintenance Review. And what that then informs the landlord is the difference in cost. So I've got a cost of standstill and I've got an investment to make. So what's the balance of that? So let's pick some figures. It's going to cost you £500,000 to stand still to maintain the building for the next 10 years. It's going to cost you £600,000 to take you down to net zero carbon. So you've got to invest £100,000, Mr. Fund, to take you on that journey. And that's an investment decision for them to make. So how do we help them make that investment decision? We've created a model of the building. We know what the energy intensity of that building is, pounds per square metre currently. What will the pounds per square metre look like when you've done the work? And what's the energy saving? So that's another factor in there. So you've got the upfront cost, but now you're starting to look at the return on your investment. So we can build that picture for them to say, actually, you're going to invest 100,000, but you're going to save £70,000 in energy saving. We're getting to a cost neutral position over the term that you want to do that. So that can be 5 years, 10 years, or even 20 years for an investment fund to hold a building. So what does that picture look like? And what we create then is a financial model, and all of this engineering stuff is of no interest at all to a fund manager, to a financial investor. The little bit they want to know is how much do I have to spend and what's my return and how long am I going to get my return. So we do that modelling for them, and at that point then they make the decision to say, okay, we will invest. And that leads us to the project stage. So on that investment decision, it can be remarkably quick, and it can be driven by factors. We've got a factor in play at the moment that EPCs, the methodology for calculating EPCs is going to change in June, and it is going to penalise gas in buildings. At the moment, EPC modelling actually favours gas in buildings against all electric. From June on commercial buildings, it's going to put gas down as a risk, and it's going to make your EPC rating work to the effect that actually our sort of overview modelling is that if you are in a B category or a C category, you will drop a category if you've got a gas-fired building. So current buildings that are D are going to fall to E category once that EPC is remodelled under the new methodology. So the investment decisions that are being made at the moment, which is why we're quite run off our feet, is we're saying, actually, if you model now, if we put LED lighting in now, we can secure you a C-rated EPC. EPCs last for 10 years, so let's get that lodged before June, and you've got yourself a C-rated EPC for the next 10 years. So you can see the sort of decisions that are being made at the moment around spending money, because we'll talk about MEES risk in a minute, but that risk to your portfolio is real, imminent, and a danger for you, because at the point of sale of a building, as we go around the life cycle, when I do my acquisition survey, my advice to the client is go and get a new EPC model done on the building and see what it really is from what you've got that certificate at. And that's another reason that you can negotiate on the price. Well, we face the same challenge when a building's been sold. There's another consultancy going to come along and challenge the work that we've done on that property. So we've created this alternative PMR, we've created the cost model, and then our business moves on to project management and project delivery, which is what we're going to talk about in terms of retrofit and how we manage that project delivery. Everything in the circle that we do is around monitoring and benchmarking. We're pulling information. We're not an energy bureau in that sense, but we pull information from everywhere that we can. And all of this circle of life is run through our own software that we've developed, our own metrics and calculations in terms of methodology, in terms of costing of PMR life cycles, alternative PMRs, financial modelling, project management, monitoring, benchmarking, auditing. Everything is done through software that we've written, developed ourselves over the last couple of years. And these two guys sat at the back here today are the geeks, as I call them, that write software. And they're sitting understanding what the software is that we're writing and what the outcome is at the end of it. So monitoring, benchmarking, but as I say, the circle of life is complete then, because funds sell property as well as buy property, and at the point of sale, and that's what I mentioned this morning, I'm currently writing a vendor survey for a property that the fund is going to sell. And once again, as a consultancy, our responsibility is to make sure that everything we say in that vendor survey is real and there's no surprises hidden away that will chip the price when it comes to that sale process. So the sort of retrofit challenges and complications that we see at the commercial property level, and I'll talk through these in a little more detail, but dilapidations, planning permissions, aged infrastructure, MEES risk, EPC rating, tender and employers' requirements, programming, commissioning, handover, user training, and then monitoring and maintenance. So there's a whole load of stages that we go in our project management. So what are dilapidations? Dilapidations are the cost of exit for a tenant at the termination of a lease. So we've got multi-tenanted buildings, so this building being an example, and this floor being an example. WSP used to occupy this floor and the floor above. They chose to leave the property. They actually terminated their lease early, but the landlord then says, okay, well, you've put petitioning in, you've put lighting in, you've done this, that and the other, you've got a cost of exit because I've got to take the building back to how it was when I gave it to you, or you've got to take the building back to how it was when I gave it to you. Obviously, some leases are different in their structure, but that's a reality for all of us as tenants. The work we've done on this floor and the work, we haven't done very much work upstairs, but the work we've done upstairs at the end of our lease, in theory, there will be a cost for us to put this back to the original landlord condition. So that's a terminal schedule of dilapidation. There are other dilapidations, but we deal with the terminal schedule of dilapidations, the end of the exit, the end of lease for a tenant. And that's subject to negotiation. So we as a consultancy will go into a floor and write our list of dilapidations, and of course the tenant will have a consultant that will write their list of dilapidations, and our costs against their costs will be a negotiation. It's not uncommon for disputes to arise, but at the end of the day, the tenant wants to get out and the landlord wants to get the floor back, and it's an agreement that is reached fairly quickly, but quite a hostile argument for a few days around why have you said it will cost that much when it will only cost this much. And examples of that are additional air conditioning, petition warning, fire alarm changes, all covered by dilapidation. So the landlord would seek to return to the property to Cat A. So Cat A is shell and core, perhaps lighting in there, some air conditioning or heating systems in there, but they want to get that back to that level as quickly as possible so that they can attract an incoming tenant. So the majority of tenants are keen to agree dilapidations and walk away. So they agree a figure, pay a figure, and they walk away. The landlord's then happy to have that pot of money. Now there is some specific requirements in law around how you spend dilapidations money. So you have to be careful how you use that pot of money. It has to be around the strip out of existing stuff and putting the building back. But you can see in this example, and this is a building in Manchester that I'm going to talk about, the sort of things that have been left behind, the data racks, the air conditioning equipment, blinds, lighting systems that may not have been the lighting systems from the original installation. But the landlord's also got some challenges with this building we're talking about. You can see it's got radiators, so it's got gas-fired heating in there. That's not a good situation to be in. But we've agreed the dilapidations, the tenant has cleared off, and we've come into this space, and we've now got to put it back together again. So there's a point here where we can raise sustainability, because we're now going to go into this, and this is the traditional way of doing things. We're going to go into this, a shop fitter is going to go into this and just completely gut this floor, put it all in a skip and send it away to landfill. Let's say they send it to landfill. That's not sustainable. That's not really a sustainable model for both the landlord and for the tenant in that equation. So landlords now are looking at doing things like Cat A plus fit out, so actually fitting the floor out so it's operational for someone coming in, so they're not having to completely refit the floor every time a tenancy change. So they're looking at the sustainability aspects of that. Of course, within the building contract, no longer a builder is allowed just to chuck everything in a skip and take it to landfill. They've got to recycle, and they've got to report on their recycling. So we've got some planning requirements to do, very much like the domestic sector, but approved documents, Part L of the building regulations, apply to us. Conservation of fuel or power in buildings other than dwellings, and approved document L2B. And those two documents guide us on what we can do with that building now in terms of development. And we had some U values earlier on the slide. We also have to deal with U values. So if we change a wall or change a window, then we've got to meet some minimum U values to comply with building regulations. And controlled services. So if we're going to change the heating system from a traditional boiler radiator system to an air conditioning heat pump type system, then we've got things that we've got to comply with in building regulations and demonstrate that we are complying with those. So actually within the commercial sector, the regulation, I believe, is tighter than it is. New building development, yes, regulated, but retrofit on existing properties, you can do what you like in your house. Nobody's really going to come and knock on your door and tell you you've contravened an energy regulation. But in a commercial building, we've got real responsibility to make sure that we're installing with energy in mind. So whilst the dilapidation, so our landlord's now got his floor that's vacant that he's going to do something with on that floor. But of course he's got the rest of the building and the rest of the tenants to consider. And if he's going to do something on that floor, he enters into an obligation to start to look at other things. So if he's going to do something around the electrics on that floor and he's going to connect to, that's an internet picture, that's not a real picture, that's an internet picture. I hope there's not many like that out there. But if he's going to do something on that floor, all of a sudden he's got to address the electrics across the whole building and make sure it's compliant with regulation. So it introduces a number of challenges for him, which we have to consider as consultants. How do we interact with the rest of the building infrastructure? And typically it's electrics and fire alarms that come up as the challenging things. But existing ductwork typically has got a life expectancy of 30, 40 years, but you can see ductwork that's been in buildings for a lot longer than that. And the cleanliness of the inside of ductwork, all of a sudden the world's changed, and good quality fresh air is something that we all want now. Perhaps it wasn't that high on the agenda a couple of years ago. And flues, boiler flues and things, all that infrastructure needs to be considered as a consequence of the tenant leaving the building and the landlord having to deal with one section of that building. Updating records as well. So in a lot of instances we take on properties that don't have a full set of operation and maintenance manuals, or the operation and maintenance manuals are still paper copies and aren't complete because the last person on site took the drawing away with them and haven't returned it to the manual. So we do a lot of work around digitising, but of course as we're doing consultancy around a project, we've got to produce the drawings for that project. So we update the records and all that is part of creating this digital model of the building. So we've got the digital twin of the building, but we're creating all the digital information that sits alongside that, the asset register, wiring diagrams are keen, floor plans, details of risers, etc. in the building. So what's driving us along the path to net zero is the MEES regulation, the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standard regulation, and it places obligations on landlords. 1st of April 2023 is interesting. If a non-domestic property is already let, landlords must not continue letting it if it has an EPC rating of F or G, must not continue letting it. So this is a bit of a step change. So you've got your tenant in there, he's already in there, but the building is rated at F and G. You've got to do something about it before 2023. So that's an interesting angle, because most of the rest of the regulation is around the point at which you're letting or selling the property. But this is a change. It's actually starting now to impact on buildings that are already let or already got a tenant in there. So that's a risk. I mean, I know of a few buildings that are F rated, but I don't think our portfolio's got very many that we need to worry about being at that level, and we're certainly doing something about them if they're down at that level.
Sorry, just to clarify that statement, what you're saying is in exactly a year's time tomorrow, if you've got a commercial property and it's a D, you've got to say to your tenant, sorry, it doesn't meet the...
No, an F or a G.
Oh, sorry,
an F or a G.
So if it was an F and you've got a tenant in there at the moment, as of a year times tomorrow, they can't rent that building.
They've got to put into place a plan to bring that EPC rating up.
Right.
And there are exemptions.
Yeah.
So if the cost of doing the work is disproportional to the benefit of the outcome of the work, they can apply for an exemption to do that. But as a commercial landlord and as a tenant, would you want to be in an F-rated or even a G-rated building? No, I wouldn't. Thank you very much.
Wouldn't it be because the legislation's been in place since 2017, so the landlords kind of had that notice.
Oh yeah, this is visibility. Yeah, they've had visibility around this. They know this is coming. Likely obligation. So this hasn't been put in statute yet, but is very much coming down the track in 2030. An EPC rating of B is going to be required before you let a building, unless you apply for exemption. So that's a massive step change to get the very much like the housing sector, to get us from where we are now, which is typically C and D rated building, up to a B is a massive step change, and will require us to degas every commercial building as it stands at the moment, based on the technology that's available to us. That's the only thing we can do, is to degas those buildings. LED lighting, solar panels, all those things are in that equation. So potential obligations. There's also going to be an obligation from at some point between 2022 and 2024 that buildings over a certain size are going to have to use this hybrid approach of measuring actual consumption against also the EPC rating. So there's going to be a requirement going forward that you start to report on the actual operational state of the building, which is an anomaly in the UK. When the European legislation was brought in, some European companies chose to do the two things that we do, the predictive performance and the operational performance, as a combined certification with an annual update to that certification. And that's the system that is used in Australia, and is the system that is pretty much going to be adopted in this country, NEIGHBORS, which is an acronym, and you'll ask me what the acronym is. The A is for Australia, the R is for rating, the E and the S are for energy, something like that, and the N stands for Northern Australia, I think. But NEIGHBORS, and in the UK we've called it NEIGHBORS UK. So, but that methodology, and I think that makes sense. There's a disconnect, and the public sector are required to do display energy certificates that report on the actual operational energy consumption, but nowhere else are you obliged to report on it, and that's just a nonsense. You're selling a building as a B rated or an A rated EPC because that's a notional prediction of energy consumption, but what's the actual prediction? How does this building perform actually? So I think that's a good change. 2027 there's an interim milestone of a C rated EPC as well, so that's why we've done that journey with our clients of what do you need to do, where do you need to get to in terms of EPC rating, and how do we model that as a financial picture. So digital twins. The other reason for creating a dynamic simulation model, this is our building in Manchester that we're talking about, is that in the simplified modelling methodology of a level 3 and a level 4, we can't put the buildings around that building, so we can't consider the shading factor. So when we're doing our heat load calculations in level 4, actually that EPC is flawed because we're not introducing any shading factor in it. So again, pretty much like we were talking about MSC before not being fit for purpose. EPCs at level 3 and level 4 aren't really fit for purpose. They're just a document to put in your file. So the dynamic simulation, we create that dynamic simulation model. We can do the solar prediction. We can model solar panels on the roof, we can model heat pumps in the building, all kinds of things within that model. So we create that digital model. That's not an easy task to do, and takes us a while to do, and costs a pretty penny.
A pretty penny? Give us a flavour. For something like that, because you're obviously...
For you, this building, if we took this building, you'd be paying between £5,000 and £10,000.
And there's nothing on this side of it. So there's got to be a discount, surely.
Oh, shading wise, yeah. No, the putting the shadings on easy. Those pink buildings go up very quickly. It's the detail of creating this.
Does it go to the level of PHPP insofar as passive house takes in the trees and the types of trees?
We don't. We would put trees in, but we don't go down into.
So that makes a massive difference.
Does. Of course it does. Yeah. Of course it does.
Thank you.
Yeah. So MEES risk. So we've come to the conclusion that we're going to take out the gas boilers in this building and we're going to put in heat pumps. The type of heat pumps that we put into buildings are variable refrigerant volume, variable refrigerant flow heat pumps. So they are different to the type of heat pumps that are going into domestic properties. A domestic property heat pump is a heat pump that is air to water. So you're using the air to heat the water. A VRF system is typically air to air, but it's using the refrigerant gas to move the heat around the building as opposed to water. And the beauty of that model of VRF, variable refrigerant flow, is that you can also move heat across the building. So if the sun's on this side of the building and this side of the building is getting warm, that side of the building will be in air conditioning mode, cooling mode. Because you're in cooling mode, you've got to reject that heat. Now, traditionally, you would just reject that heat outside. Well, with a variable refrigerant volume, we can pump that heat across the building and put it on the other side of the building. So we're moving heat around the building, so that makes it very energy efficient. A heat pump, a domestic heat pump, I think they talk about 3-to-1 being the best, 1 kilowatt, 3 kilowatt of useful energy. And I think that decreases as you get into winter. With a VRF system, a correctly designed VRF, you're getting 6-to-1.
Is that COP or SPF?
That's COP.
COP.
Yeah. So,
Is that the point where I asked, what is COP?
coefficient of performance. He's using acronyms now.
I was just testing out that SPF is seasonal performance factor. So that's the important one, because anyone can get a good COP. But it's in the winter you need the SPF, the seasonal bit.
So we actually, in air conditioning terms, we use seasonal energy efficiency ratio, so SEER ratings on those.
I'm glad you explained that, because I didn't know what that was.
Yeah, because heat pumps performance drops off below the outside ambient. So what's the real figures? So when air conditioning heat pumps first came into the country, we were looking at Asia figures, 30 degrees C outside, and they look great on paper, and then we're running at 5 degrees C in the UK going, they don't work very well, do they? And they freeze up. But that's a different topic I can talk to you about. So we've got questions to ask. Is there sufficient power for us to actually switch from gas to electricity? Which is exactly the same question that you raised earlier about a number of properties, and we've got to upgrade the substation, or we've got to use our electricity more efficiently in the building. So we are doing things in buildings to reduce electricity consumption, large commercial buildings, and we can make a significant difference if we install LED lighting through a building, for instance. We're making a significant energy savings, so we're harvesting back into it. And at the size of buildings that we deal with, there's usually quite a bit of power kicking around anyway. So we have got the potential to do that, but we have got to consider that, and we've got to consider the internal infrastructure within the building. Typically our heat pump plant is going to go up on the roof, typically, but do the buzz bars through the building, are they capable of carrying the power that we need to get to the roof? What infrastructure work have we got to do that? So if we've got a 10-storey building, that building in Manchester is 5 floors, we're looking at floors 3 and 4, but now we've got to get power to the roof, and we've got to actually start to work on the whole infrastructure of the electrical supply. So what are we doing with our landlord at that point? We're saying to our landlord, okay, we can do this modification to this floor, and fit this floor out, no problem at all. But actually, are we future-proofing the building? And do you want to future-proof the building? Do you want us to put in the electrical infrastructure that will allow us to convert the whole of this building at some point to heat pumps? And if so, there's a substantial cost to be dealt with. That building that we looked at actually is a listed building in terms of its facade. The building had the roof changed on it, and it's a pitched roof. In our original design, working with the fabric consultants, the architects on that, we designed a platform to go on that roof to house all of the condensing units for future, but it fell down at planning. So we are left with the challenge of where do we put our condensing units, because we can't put them on the roof. And this picture is a real picture from that building that we were able to rectify, because the tenant that vacated the floor had actually installed all of this air conditioning. I think you might be able to see on there that they're on £30 rubber feet. It's actually the plastic. It's the big foot that we specify and use. And you're right, that vibration becomes obviously more of a factor in this. But they'd packed it so tightly, and what they'd done, and this is part of our consultancy, and it didn't happen before we got involved, but it's part of our consultancy. We would approve any works that the tenant's going to do. But what happened before we got to site was that the tenant pitched up and installed their air conditioning units, and what they did was these two air conditioning units were serving somebody else's floor. They'd created so much heat in this area that those two air conditioning units keep tripping out, so that tenant's got a problem. But the new tenants, I'm happy, I'm working, I've got what I want. So our management of that, but what we've been able to do is to strip all this back and create a space to put in new air conditioning units. But all that's a factor in how we're looking at managing the building. So multi-tenancy buildings increase the complexity of transition. This building, as I say, has got gas-fired boilers and radiators, but we're going to convert one floor to VRF. In actual fact, the phased approach on this, we're doing 3 of the floors, and the other 2 floors are already there. But that phased approach means that we actually want to get rid of gas now. So we're going to get rid of gas out of here on this floor with these radiators and put VRF in. But that's only going to be a marginal benefit to the energy performance certificate, because other floors are still on gas. So how quickly can we transition the rest of the floors? So we have to look at lease breaks when a tenant's going to come out. So is that a phased plan, or can we do that work whilst tenants are in place? And that's a negotiation. And actually one of the upsides of COVID is that everybody now realises they can work from home. So there is much more of a willingness to say to a tenant, if you go out and work from home for 6 weeks, we'll come in, bang, 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 and then you come back and you're all done and everybody's happy. And there's more of a willingness to do that. Whereas before, if you put that as a challenge to someone, they would say, no way can we work from home. Other things, I mean, this building, the roof works, etc., the water tanks are there, but they're not coming out anytime soon because there's no physical way of getting them out. They are sectional, they will break down, but it gives us real challenges around the transition of the building over time and how things get adapted and without any consideration of how they can be maintained and moved along. So we write, we call them employers' requirements, they're specifications, and this details everything that needs to be done on that project. So we're now at the stage where we're specifying what we want. In our world, we pass the ultimate design responsibility to the contractor. So we're giving them guidance on what we want, but it's up to the contractor. They become design and build, and it's their responsibility to take that on. And there are good reasons from that sat as a consultant, but there are also good reasons for that sat as a contractor as well. and I've worn both hats. So, but we specify things. So we specify in detail what the lighting scheme is going to be, because that's important to the EPC rating. That's the margins we're going down to now. We're not just saying LED lighting. We're talking about the harmonic distortion, the uniformity, the lux levels in detail, because that's in our model, and that's what we're banking on. That's what we're telling our client. Spend £100,000 on lighting, we're going to move your EPC from here to here. And if we spend £100,000 on lighting and we don't move the EPC from here to here, then we're embarrassed about that. So we're very specific in detail and those sort of things, and regulations and standards. So I think that is something that, when we were talking about the domestic sector earlier, our attention to detail on saying this is what you're going to do, instead of saying I want a heat pump on my house, we're saying I want a heat pump on my house, and actually you're going to do it like this. And that's the difference, isn't it? So a full set of employers' requirements, and we run a tender process. We run the tender process. Typically we go out to 3 people. Sometimes we go out to 5 people. But pretty much like you, the return of people tendering, particularly if they don't think they've got much prospect of winning work. In a lot of instances, we are tendering to people that are under a framework contract already in place with ourselves or with the landlord. So they already know that they're in the running for it. But we mark contractor tender submissions not only against cost. Obviously cost is the driving factor, and you very quickly see who's made a mistake in their tendering when you get the costs in, and we very rarely sort of jump to the lowest one and say great, get on with it, because they've usually made a mistake. And one of the hardest things for us to deal with during a contract is escalating prices during that contract, and have to keep going back to the landlord and saying, oh, I need another £10,000 please, because they missed off something. So we analyse the tender submissions in detail, but then we also mark those tender submissions as a risk factor. So how much of that work is going to be done directly or by subcontractors? That's a factor for us. It's a risk factor for us. And subcontractor of the subcontractor, how does that work? How are they going to manage that? What is their CDM regulation setup? How are they going to manage all those sort of things? So the project management skills. But also then we also mark on the risk of escalation of cost. So are we confident that the contractor's price is the contractor's price, and that will be the end price? On the projects that we deal with, you can see the sort of figures. That's a £400,000 contract, £400,000 to £500,000 contract. On those sort of figures, there are always going to be a drift on cost of some sort. So we put a provision in. So we put a 5 to 10% provision on top of that figure for things that we'll find. Because one of the things that you have to do on this sort of work is validations beforehand. So there are the unknowns. We've had a look at the electric in the building, but until we start to take ceilings down and stuff, we don't know. So there are unknowns, so validations are going to come into play that will potentially lift the cost of that project. And of course there is value engineering as well, and the negotiation about value engineering. So as I say, we produce a design intent, an employer's requirement, but a contractor may come along and say, actually we've looked at this, we've had a look at this, we've got above the ceiling here, we could do this differently. We could put this distribution board in a different place. We could put the air conditioning plant not where you're saying, we could put it over here, and that would save us on pipe work and this, that and the other, and we could bring X amount of save into the project. Normally they don't tell us that, they just save it and put it in their back pocket, but when they're looking for the order, the value engineering comes into play, and we talk about that, and that's where the benefit is to them of taking design and build, because they can harvest some savings themselves in design and build, and we're happy for them to take the responsibility of making that change themselves. So like for like, it is a number of issues. It's not just price driven. And we quite often go to our client and say, actually, we've got 3 prices, but this price is higher, but this is the right price for the job as well. Because we also benchmark, so we know pounds per square metre how much stuff's going to cost. So we know very quickly if we're out of that sector. So then we're slowly getting through this project. Sorry about the time it takes, but we're now. What's the impact on other tenants? What's the CDM, the regulation, health and safety regulations? Validations have got to be done, notifications, planning, a contract type has got to be put in place. And what's the cash flow through the project? And I know this because in my past life, I was a managing director. I ran a building services contracting company for a number of years, and I know that cash flow is a killer. And so I'm very conscious of working with contractors on the cash flow through the project. So when will they get paid? When will they have to pay suppliers for equipment to make sure that the project stacks up? And if you're running a project at £500,000, £700,000, you need to make sure that that contractor is actually going to last to the end of the job, and be able to deliver it. So the whole exercise of getting us to site in pre-contract, pre-mobilisation. And then we carry out the works, and that's the easy bit, is carrying out the works. They all get on site and they do their stuff. And we get to the commissioning stage, and this is part of my mantra as well. It's all well and good commissioning, and commissioning sheets are fine, and they tell you that the system works. But actually, and this again applies to the domestic sector, if no one knows how to use the system, how they control the lights and set the BMS, the commissioning's been a waste of time. And that's very much the same with a heat pump. If someone's installed a heat pump, if nobody knows how to operate it inside that house, you've wasted your time, because they will be spending more money on running it. And exactly the same for us. BMS, you can commission a BMS, but as soon as a tenant moves in and starts to adjust something, the building has gone out of sequence. So commissioning is important. Yeah, tells you that you've installed it and you've got everything working as it should be working. But actually hand over. We talk about soft landings. How do you hand that over? So you hand it over to the building manager, and the building manager know how to work it, but then the tenant comes in, and how do we hand it over to the tenant, and how do we make provision for handing it over to the tenant in perhaps 3 or 6 months' time when the tenant pitches up and takes the letting? All those things are factors, but are key factors in our management of the building, because this is back to sustainability and energy efficiency. So we've done the project. So start to finish on this building, radiators out, ceiling out. I'm not 100% sure, because we don't deal with fabric, whether that's insulation going in or insulation coming out, but it is a factor, and this is an interesting discussion we were having. Who with? I don't know who with. On heat metering, billing and networking. If a tenant comes in and insulates that floor there, the tenant above is going to get an increased heating bill, because we've now stopped passing heat to him. And one of the things that regulations on heat metering network billing is introducing is the requirement to bill tenants on their heat as they use it. Traditionally, we've got separate meeting in this building, so we get our own bills for what we consume. But in a large building, it's done on a pounds per square metre basis. So everything's lumped together, and you pay pounds per square metre on a proportional basis against what you've used. But the regulation that's coming into play now is demanding that every demise space is separately metered and heated. So a tenant, as I say, may get a shock if there's a fit out done and all of a sudden the floor's insulated and his bill's going up. We're installing here exposed fan coil units with ducted distribution, all the rage. This is an old print work, so it actually fits the environment of an old print works. Not the favourite thing for me as an engineer, because I don't like to see ductwork and cable tray and stuff, but other people do, all well and good. So we move the project along, and we go along and check that the work's being carried out to the requirements and the specification. And we get to this stage. So this is a Cat A plus that I mentioned. The landlord has gone one stage further than just fitting out and getting ready for tenant. He's fitted out with all the fixtures and fitting in there, so it's turnkey. We've put the data fibre into the building as well, so everything's there. You can come and plug and play. Come and sit at your desk tomorrow and start working. And that's an attractive proposition I suppose we have been in a recession, but in a COVID-induced recession, a lot of companies went out of business. There are a lot of people starting up fresh. And those people that are starting up fresh don't necessarily want to commit to a 5-year lease, but they do want office space, and they want office space that's ready. So they would rather be paying an extra £1 per metre squared for instant space than getting it and having to fit it out themselves, and they're ready to go. And it's flexibility, then they can move in and out of that space. What we're also creating now in office spaces, as you can see here, is this collaboration areas, pretty much like we've got here, because I think that the office market is changing. People will come into offices to work, but they won't be coming into offices to sit at it. Obviously, there are some jobs that will require people to sit at desk call centres, etc. But most people will come into an office to meet with other people and collaborate. But if they want to write a report, they want to do something, I think people will sit at home and do that now. I think there's a change in the way that people work, and it's it's actually the reality of the way that people at directors level have abused that flexibility. I've always worked flexibly. I work where I want to. I'm the boss. I'll go home if I want to, and I'll work where I want to. But actually, I'm paying you, so you'll sit at your desk all day because I'm paying you to sit there. Well, that's not. Why do I go home and work? Because I'm more effective writing a report, sat with nobody pestering me. So why shouldn't that be the same for somebody else? So that flexibility is going to happen now, and it should have happened, because why are we all driving into town and etc. etc. So sustainability reasons why that should happen. But these spaces are going to still exist, and they exist for meetings, they exist for collaboration, because the reality of us working, one of the principal reasons that we go to work is to network and meet people. We're engaging, aren't we? As humans, we need interaction with other humans, and if we live in isolation and only talk to your wife every night or your husband every night, then life becomes quite grim. So we want to go off. We want to go off and meet with people. We want to eat pizza and go to the pub. That's what we want to do, really, isn't it? So these spaces will exist. Collaboration spaces is a changing environment, and real estate landlords are at that. What I want to now do is also go onto my little high horse about something else. These grills, exposed grills, and this is another benefit of experiencing retrofitting work. You'll see that the grill itself is that inner circle. The plate around the outside is something called a coanda plate. Now, it's very fashionable not to have a ceiling in place, but the benefit of having a ceiling is that air is induced across the ceiling. So when the air discharges out the grill, it's actually induced across the ceiling, and then it drops in a uniform pattern around the space. If you don't have a ceiling, the air drops like that. So where you've got an open plan office with an exposed ceiling, and you've got fan coil units, and you've got lovely bits of grills, and you've got grills above people's desks, they complain of drafts because the air's dropping on their heads. So by putting a coanda plate in, we're replicating, inducing that airflow, that ceiling system of moving the air and spreading the airflow pattern. And airflow patterns and designing airflow patterns in buildings to reduce drafts is something that we have always done traditionally as consultants. But the reality of the modern world, of modern design, people want the look and the feel of the space before the operational elements of the space. So we are compromising in what we do, and that's why I don't like exposed ductwork, because it's a compromise on design of making people comfortable. And if people aren't comfortable, they don't work well. So it's those sort of things that I suppose, and this is a transition in my career, because I was a contractor, and when I was a contractor, consultants were the bane of your life, and they didn't know what they're on about, and they don't know what they're doing. But actually, now with the other hat on, there's little nuances as a consultant that you bring to the equation in doing that. So that's the end of my talk. Did I run to time?
Yes, well done. We do have about 10 minutes now for questions, and we've actually got a couple of questions from online, so we'll start with those. So one is from Steve Carpenter saying, could I just clarify that all commercial buildings will require a minimum EPC rating of B to be able to be commercially let? Is that for all existing commercial buildings that have tenants?
So the rating of B by 2030 requires you to, you won't be able to let or sell that building as a new lease, not existing tenant.
Yeah.
Okay. But of course there's exemptions to that as well.
That's right. Yep. Okay, so there are exemptions. And then the second one from Phil Brown, how do you see meeting the requirements and impact of the proposed new building regulation Part L non-dwellings, which come into force from the summer 2022?
Well, impact is on design, and we're sort of designing against those standards, but it is degassing buildings, so electrification, heat pumps, VRF technology is the route, and the only route available to us. So the challenge we have in some buildings where that's not practical, we could go for an exemption against the regulation, but we're also banking on new technology coming along. The future of heat pumps, can we make heat pumps operate to a higher water flow temperature than they currently are, because what we've got is a lot of buildings with 4-pipe can coil units on it that have been designed at 70 degrees C water flow temperatures, and we can't get that from a heat pump. But the prospect of changing out fan coil units across multiple fan coil units, hundreds of fan coil units across buildings, makes it not feasible or practical to do it with tenants in place. So how do we manage that? And the hope is that technology will answer that question for us in the coming years. So we're advising our clients in those situations to do nothing. Don't jump yet. Let's wait and see. But solar PV and heat pumps, electrification is the route.
It's the route to go. Okay, lovely. Right, well, I can see Vicky's got a first question.
Thanks, both of you. I think it was almost like a compare and contrast sort of presentation that everyone else felt, because I think it felt, from an audience perspective, very mapped out in commercial, very clear in terms of process. And then for you and Sam, you're trying to navigate all of this. And as a team, it's not mapped out, it's not clear, and there's a lot to do. So I know you guys have already started talking about potential projects, but I suppose if we were talking to everybody in government now, where is the opportunity to facilitate knowledge transfer or sharing of best practice across both sectors? Because the council has to focus, you know, you're talking about your own estate, and it felt like a lot of that was quite inward focused. And then we've got, you know, a whole industry out there that is already delivering some innovative projects. So what's the ask, I guess, to make this happen, to share that knowledge, to get that best practice coming across, to support councils that have now got to commit most of their budget to adult social care, but also decarbonise their estate and offer advice to everybody else? How can we bring some of this together?
I think the sort of issue that came out from Sam's presentation is the management of data and how they manage data, and we manage data well. Something that we're looking at is the analysis of EPCs, because there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of EPCs. So how do we quickly do an analysis of those and grab some headlines out of them? What really interests us in the same phase in the public sector is how we can grab information from display energy certificates. Display energy certificates give you 3 years energy data, updated. If we can grab the information from a display energy certificate, immediately grab 3 years energy information, grab the detail that is entered as part of a display energy certificate on the type of building, the type of system that's installed, we can run an analysis then to say, okay, well that benchmark in that building, we know the floor area of the building, we benchmark the building against its kilowatt hours consumption. We know what type of system's in that building, so if it's an oil-fired boiler, well, we know what that's going to need to be done to change that, so we can then say the predicted cost on that. So that process that Sam has to go through of making a business case, we can do very quickly. So where it takes Sam a long time to do 10 buildings and get that through the process, we could actually run a scenario across all the public buildings in Shropshire and say, this is your cost benefit analysis, and actually this is what you're going to save. And Mr. Financial Director sat at the top of Shropshire, who's got a pension fund pot of money, spend that money because it's going to come back to you. And that's the real change that needs to be made in the public sector. But I'm sat here thinking to myself, that's fine, but I'm looking at all the challenges that Sam's got and thinking, I wouldn't like to be ticking all those boxes and filling all those forms in.
Well, yeah, no, so to be fair, there's definitely scope for there's always this sort of in-house, external type stuff going on, but there's, you know, you can say, well, there's one option, improve the administration internally in-house, so the whole process is quicker, gain all the skill sets that Neil's talking about, and that EVORA EDGE clearly have, because they've been working on this. You know, there's some, you know, years of research go into this and into this area, and very skilled engineers. But how do we weigh that up against the skill sets we have at the moment within the council, you know, be realistic. Are we able to deliver that, or is it better to use a service such as Neil's to deliver, to do that cost assessment against the buildings? I mean, I can fairly confidently benchmark it and say what the savings will be, but what I can't do is cost what it would be to actually deliver that work. And that's the issue we're up against, really.
That's okay. That's why we're all here, isn't it? You know, that's the whole point, is to raise these issues and get the conversation going. But I've got another question. Sorry, guys, if anyone wants a microphone. I think we've talked about the buildings a lot, and Simon's team did a great job talking about the individuals in those buildings. And it's cropped up quite a lot in relation to, you can do all this, put all these measures in, but then if they turn the heating up to full blast, you know, it all goes out the window anyway, or open the windows and wreck that lovely system that you've got going. In terms of, I'm interested in the users as well, and I was thinking about citizen science and where that fits. And obviously you see a lot of that conversation happening in health, and in terms of assistive technology and how we can keep people in their homes for longer, and healthy buildings. Where does that map across to this? Does it map across? Who's doing it? Have you seen much happening in that space? And is there an opportunity there around working with a lot of individuals together to plug their data into this as well? So we get the smart metering data, but we also get the individual's response to that data, so that we're getting a more holistic picture of how these buildings operate. It's a question.
Yeah, it's probably not one that I can answer. I think Simon can probably answer it, and the example he gave earlier is probably the the level it's at.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that comparison with health and technology, and how actually I don't know the details of that, Vicky, but it's interesting to hear in your assessment that you feel like it's beginning to work. I have a question of actually sustainability leadership coming to mind, and I think, you know, our experience of working with housing associations, I think Vicky's gone now, hasn't she? But, you know, just that kind of sense of what is the direction from the top of the organisation, because in our experience of trying to support tenants, and actually this also applies to Shropshire Council processes too, if the top of the organisation is not supportive of opening the channels and using processes to support tenants and get money spent, then those systems will default to blockage. And the home's already an EPCD, I've got 10,000 other properties, I haven't got any spend planned on this until we do the kitchens in 2028, don't bother me. And below, we're seeing the tenants going, we're in so much trouble here. As the lady was saying in the video, I'm making choices about fairly significant issues in relation to her life, and her health is deteriorating. If that broader system is unable to acknowledge those challenges, and to perhaps try and get away from that property perspective only to a perspective of property and people, if it can't do that, then I think they will continue to struggle to unblock the blockages which I feel are currently there. Sorry, Mandy, I hope. And I think probably I would agree with that, you know, in relation to local authority as much as perhaps other organisations. So there's something of organisational change process perhaps in there.
Property, people and planet.
That'll do. Yeah.
I think also on that, sustainability leadership is all well and good, because people working in sustainability do that for good reason. Ultimately, I've always found that the person that makes the decision is the financial director, and that's where these things have got to be unblocked at the finance level. Make a compelling case, and that's where change will come. Yeah.
Mandy, I was interested, because what you were saying, Simon, and you said you'd had a very helpful counsellor helping in your project. I mean, do you think that's an avenue that could be more utilised?
Person actually, but we are making small steps. They haven't put any money into this sort of area before. Last year they put £50,000, not very much. This next financial year, £500,000. So if they keep going in that direction, and they can see the worth in putting it, and I'm on about retrofitting private sector homes now, so it's not even their own stock. We are making some progress in the right areas. But you have to have finance involved right from the get-go, because if you don't, you can't hook them in afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, and I guess it's the same with all organisations. Put a diplomatic hat on, but there's an approval process, and the bigger the budget, the higher up the organisation needs to go really to get approved. I was just going to say quickly on health and social care, on the profit side of it, if there is such, well, there is a huge spend in that sector, so there is a massive spend, which alludes to a lot of savings that could be made as well. So there is a commercial case.
I was just going to add a comment really that obviously a lot of those projects were match funded by ERDF, which is coming to an end.
Yeah.
So we do need to think differently about how we can, invest in these properties. But just to comment on the ERDF process and the paperwork that brings, anyone who's been involved in European Regional Development Fund projects, and the impact that will have had upon the procurement process. I'm not making excuses, but there is a whole load of processes you have to go that really slow down the projects that Sam's been involved in. So there's an opportunity there, isn't there, to influence how the shared prosperity funding perhaps that is coming through gets delivered, to really challenge to make sure that those mistakes or those obstacles hopefully don't get replicated again as we move forward without ERDF funding or European funding. That's just a comment there.
Right.
Could I just make a point that the quick wins on de-risking the bureaucracy element, as you touched on earlier, Mandy, surely permitted development rights for any eco measures should be given, because the fact that one council has got to ask the other half of the left hand is asking the right hand for permission to insulate a home, surely that should be a given in this world that we live in. That's a quick win. If government made that mandatory planning statement, it would just shortcut a whole 9 weeks and a whole load of cost. Simple solutions, but nobody seems to be thinking of the easy wins.
Right. Are there any other questions? No, I've just had a quick look online. I can't see any online either. Right, well, in that case, we will bring it to an end. Yeah.